Good evening. Welcome to the museum and welcome to this new presentation where it's going to be more of a discussion. We're glad that Durant's here and we're glad that you all are here too. If you haven't visited our new textile exhibit, please do so. It's in our traveling exhibit hall. It tells the story along the walls of textile in South Carolina in general, but we have lots of things that deal with Lawrence County. I also want to encourage you to consider attending our birthday party on August the 23rd. The Museum Association will be 20 years old, and this is our 20th year, not here, of course, but they've been working on getting to this point for that many years. And so please consider joining us. We'll have live music, have a band, we'll have dancing, we'll have great food and beverages and a silent auction. Please check our website or our Facebook page to find out more information about that. So welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we own our guest, and we'll go ahead and get started. It's good to see everybody here tonight. Tonight's going to be a little bit different. I wanted to talk about testing. Testing seems to be okay now. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No, it's on that end. Test. A little while ago, it was working perfect. Y'all can hear it now, though, I assume.
You got it?
I don't know. We'll see. There we go again.
Needs to be up higher.
Go ahead. This is my wife, by the way. Test. We ready? Thank you. Appreciate it. So, I've only been doing this, I've only been lecturing for about 6 years. It was 2019 when we started, and I'm about to turn the sound system off. Test. It's not loud enough. Test. You can leave it there, leave it down low, and I'll talk loud. I'm sure everybody in here can hear me. So we'll see. We'll try it again. Like I say, I've just been lecturing for the past 6 years. The first lecture I gave was at Tom Widener's Simpsonville Revolutionary War Museum in Simpsonville. And I appreciate Tom giving me that opportunity. I have been interested in history my entire life, but it was only after I quit writing a weekly gardening column for the Tribune Times newspaper, and I wrote that column for 15 years. I wrote over 800 gardening columns, and any chance I got, I put a little history in there. And I really tied in history and gardening, believe it or not, as best that I could. So when the newspaper kind of went down, I was looking for something else to do, and I started doing battlefield preservation. And while I was doing battlefield preservation, I was always asking myself, and this is what I ask myself on every single battlefield I ever go on, every time I go on it. And that question is, why? And I just had to know what were the forces leading these men to battle, and when they got to battle, what did they do and how did they do it? Because actually military history is my most favorite topic, so I enjoy that. But as you know, I've been doing this intensively for 6 years or so. And I have learned tons of new things. And I want to share with you those new things that I've learned, these revelations, if you will. And I do discuss them in my lectures and so forth, but I want to, kind of focus on the things that just hit me like a sledgehammer when I started finally realizing this is what we're talking about. So, one of the first things that struck me was how these Revolutionary War battles, folks, we are right in the middle of them. We're right in the middle. Local, local, local. There's so much local action and activity that happened here. And you know, as I've said before, within 50 miles of where we are right here, within 50 miles, there are 100 Revolutionary War battlefields. And, I want to know the question of why on every single one of them. Now, I will also point out, I hate to be sacrilegious, but folks, this is my Bible. This is Parker's Guide to the Revolutionary War in South Carolina. There's over 400 battles listed here. There's battles for every county. There's directions to every battle, locations and so forth. So here is Laurens County. And there's 17 different Revolutionary War battles, incidents, fistfights, killings. The most gruesome battle and atrocity in the state of South Carolina, along with Clouds Creek, occurred here in Laurens County thanks to Bloody Bill Cunningham and all of his activities. So here in Laurens County, which was called the Little River District during the Revolutionary War, it's a microcosm of what went on in the Revolutionary War, and you can explain, you can illustrate what happened in the Revolutionary War simply through study in Laurens County. So that is one blessing we have, is that we have all of this within a stone's throw of each other. Now, another revelation that I had during my reading was just how primitive life was back then. This area, the 96th District, 10 westernmost counties in the state of South Carolina, excluding Greenville, Anderson, Pickens, and Oconee, because those were Cherokee territory, off limits. You had to have a passport to go into Cherokee territory, and that was for the traders primarily. So in 1755, with the Treaty of Saluda, the Cherokees sold to the British colonial government what later became the 96th District. And I say sold because it was a mutually beneficial arrangement set up. The Treaty of Saluda lasted for 22 years, one of the longest lasting treaties that there was. And it was a two-way street. The Cherokees provided deer skins and medicinal plants, ginseng, things like that, to the British, and the British were supplying European manufactured goods to the Cherokees, and the Cherokees became very dependent upon those goods. Their entire life changed when they came up against the European culture. So now, 1755, this area is legal to be settled. It is the frontier of America. Pennsylvania was full. People started going down through Virginia and North Carolina. Boy, that was crowded. but we got fresh, virgin, new land down in South Carolina. So they loaded up their Conistea wagons. They came down the Great Wagon Road. When they got to about Camden or when they got to about Charlotte, they came into the backcountry of South Carolina. And most of these folks are, came down from Pennsylvania. And there were also groups that came in from Charleston, but not many as came down that Great Wagon Road. So when you got two 18-year-olds with one toddler and another baby on the way, and they're coming down the Great Wagon Road, and they get to a place in the backcountry of South Carolina, and they stake their claim. And there's different ways. Some were granted. I won't be talking about those different ways right now. But they've got their Conestoga wagon, and their goal is to get here in late winter or early spring. And they set up camp at their wagon. And they continue to live in that wagon or under that wagon. But what they immediately start to do is clear land. The first crops that they get in, that they have to get in, it doesn't matter if you have a house or not, you chopping down trees, you're pulling out stumps, you're grading your fields so that you can plant corn and flax. That's how important clothes were. These folks only had one set of clothes once a year, if they're that lucky. And if they had shoes, that was a 50-50 proposition. So they get their corn and their flax in, and they start, developing that property. Now, one system was the quit rents program, where you could stake your claim, and for 2 years you would rent that property from the British Crown. And after 2 years, an inspector would come by and he would look and he would see if you'd made suitable improvements, such as fields, a home, a log cabin by this time, a barn, and whatever he felt was necessary. At that point, you could quit your rent, and that was your land free and clear. So that's one way that settlement was encouraged. But, as they chopped down the timber to clear the land, they would set those logs aside. By fall, they would start to build their log cabin, and neighbors could help. But these would be hand-hewn log cabins, small, primitive, lucky to have hinges on the door. You may have one window. The first thing that would be built would be the hearth out of field stone. And all of this would be pegged in with dowels and pegged together. The only place that nails would be used would be in the roof with cedar shingle roofs. And that's where they would live, throughout the first winter. They were living on dirt floors. And that first winter, if they had a cow and a couple of pigs, and it was wintertime and they didn't have a barn, that's where the livestock would live. So it was kind of good that they only had dirt floors, I suppose. But anyway, this was the pioneer economy. These individuals tamed the world with an axe and a knitting needle. And as they prospered, and they were here for prosperity, and they gained prosperity through the sweat off their brow. But after a few years, maybe somebody else is coming down the Great Wagon Road, and he looks at the spread that they have, their home place, and he says, hey, I kind of like your little setup here. I'll trade you this team of oxen, and I've got all these, I got a herd of cows. You can have that too. Will you trade with me? So then that couple, with 4 or 5 kids by now, they pull up stakes and they go start it and do it all over again. And this is kind of the way that that things happened and that things evolved. So one thing I did want to do tonight, I talked about how we may have a freewheeling discussion this evening. Y'all know that during my lectures, I don't like to get questions in midstream. And the primary reason is because whatever question I get is the next sentence I'm just getting ready to say. But, and then it gets my feeble train of thought off. But I do want to have discussion, and I thought what we would do would talk about 2 or 3 different topics, and from local and now primitive, and see if anybody has any questions or comments. And if you don't, I'm going to go on again. But if you do, that's fine, because I'm going to stop periodically. Yes, Tracy? Speak loud.
I happened to be talking to some ladies who spin wool one day recently at Haygood Mill. Not too long ago. And we got to talking about whether the people at that time actually spun wool or worked with flax. And my understanding is that that was all, that their clothing and material, whatever, had to be bought from the British. So I'm not really sure they...
No, they made their own clothes. These are homespun. So I told you about making flax and how important that was. Excuse me. There are 21 steps in making flax. In making linen. They turned flax into linen, and I couldn't begin to make linen. But they also had sheep. They had every farm animal that there was to have. Sheep, pigs, horses, cows, all of that. Chickens, you know, they had everything, rabbits. So, and the sheep, they would shear the sheep, and they would spin that into wool. And they would take linen thread, and that's what they would weave through the wool, okay? You know, to hold it together, cross it around. And the material that was made, and they would make shirts out of it, and it was called linsey woolly. So that was homespun, and they definitely had that. And then, you know, they pinned it on the deer skins for leggings and coats and all sorts of things. They used animal skins. Yes, Ann?
Don't anybody miss the display downstairs, because I was looking at it and talking about trying to make wool and flax trying to make it into cloth, and they show it, and I'm just amazed that anybody could do it. But the whole history of it in our country, even as a whole, is amazing. So don't miss the exhibit.
So it's right downstairs, what we're just talking about. That's great. Way to go, Lawrence County Museum. Well, if you do have any other questions, please hold them, and you know, we'll have other opportunities to ask questions again. Oh, one thing I've been happy to discover, you know, in my readings and so forth, is the importance of geography. Boy, I've learned more about the geography of South Carolina, and I love it. It's great. The rivers, we have rich, vibrant river systems, and we are blessed at that. And this led to the further development of the pioneer and economy as people got more established. Mills started showing up everywhere. Every time that there was a drop in elevation on a creek or a river, that's where the mills were. And the mills became so important. That was one area of commerce. They were located about every 10 miles apart. And you'd bring your, you know, wheat in to be ground into flour. You'd bring your corn in to be ground into cornmeal. Growing corn, you know, that was a life-sustaining crop right there. And you could grow corn, and you could grow 10 bushels and get that in your wagon and take it to the mill and exchange it, or take it to somewhere else and trade that for a cow or whatever you wanted to do. And, you know, your wagon would be loaded down. And you could take that same corn and you could distill it. and you could turn that 10 yards of corn into 1 gallon of liquor, and you could now transport 10 times what you could have transported before in the selling of alcohol, and that was a perfectly acceptable way to do things. The largest distiller in America at the beginning of the Revolutionary War was George Washington. So the art of making whiskey was tried and true for a long time, but that's another thing that they could do as far as expanding the economy. But again, as far as geography is concerned, so it's very important where those mills are, and they became centers of commerce. They became areas where people got to know each other. During the Revolutionary War, they were all targets, because what the miller would do, he would grind your wheat into flour, and he would take 10% of your crop. And you would get the 90%, and you go off and you would make bread for the next few months. And meantime, the miller is developing a stock of cornmeal and flour, and he can trade that now for horses or slaves. There were very few slaves in the backcountry of South Carolina during this time. Most homesteads, had 1 or 2. There were 5,000 slaves in the backcountry at the beginning of the American Revolution. There were 35,000 Europeans. There were 100,000 slaves along the coast of South Carolina at the time of the Revolution, and there was 35,000 Europeans as well. And when I say Europeans, I'm talking about the English and the Scotch and the Scotch-Irish and the Germans and the French Huguenots. 5 different European cultures were here, and all of them were important. So another thing about the geography and the knowledge of the rivers is knowing where the fords were. The fords were so important. That's where the roads went, to the fords or the ferries, either one. But you had to cross these rivers. Time of the Revolutionary War, there were no bridges anywhere around. The closest bridge to Lawrence County during the Revolutionary War was 150 miles away. King Street Lower Bridge or the bridge at Monk's Corner. Those were the closest to the backcountry. So in studying battles and tactics, when you know the rivers and how they come into play, that just adds another level of understanding, and I want y'all to realize that. Pay attention, learn these rivers we got. They're incredible. The Catawba, the Broad, the Saluda, the Wateree, the Congaree, they all drained into the Santee. Santee discharges between Charleston and Georgetown. The Santee watershed is the second biggest watershed on the East Coast. Charlotte drains into the Santee. So the biggest watershed on the East Coast is the bay, Chesapeake Bay, and the second biggest is the Santee. So the Santee is quite a bit. It's 300 yards wide. And when William Washington and his cavalry unit, under the command of Andrew White at that time, camped with their backs to the Santee, and Bannister Tarleton came upon them, they were unprepared. The only way William Washington could get away was to crawl, to swim that 300 yards across the Santee. And as he went, he threw away sword. If he had a pistol, threw it away. He wanted to make himself as light as possible so he could swim that 300 yards, being shot at the whole time. And that's how about 30 or 40 of those survivors did get away. So the geography is important, and it really helps by knowing the geography. Another huge factor as far as geography is concerned. There is a ridge that runs right through South Carolina. There is a ridge where the southern portion drains into the Savannah, and the northern portion drains into the Santee. But that ridge is dry. That ridge does not cross any rivers anywhere. And that ridge is what is the Cherokee Path. That ridge went all the way up to Kiowee, which was the Cherokee lower town capital. And so the Cherokees knew they could go to the coast, they could carry deer skins on their backs to the coast, weighing 100 pounds at a time. And they could walk all the way down and wound up in King Street in Charleston without crossing a river. We use that Cherokee Path today all the time. It's called Interstate 26. From Columbia to Charleston, you do not cross any rivers. And the only river that's crossed is the Broad in Columbia, as far as the rest of 26 is concerned. So I have enjoyed learning about the geography of South Carolina. Do you have a question? Then you're raising your hand. So another thing that struck me, and this also is going along with the primitiveness of the American Revolution, is the primitiveness of the weaponry. You know, flintlock weaponry, there's nothing more primitive as far as it's not percussion. It's a level of ignition that's right below percussion. But when you have to put a little bit of black powder in the frizzing pan, and then the rest of your black powder, down your barrel with your ball, slamming it down in there with the ramrod, as time consuming as that is, 20 seconds while you're being shot at. And you have to be standing up. Well, you have to be standing up to load a rifle. The muskets that were used during the Revolutionary War, again, are just primitive. A round ball, about 75 caliber or 69 caliber, shooting out of a smooth bore muzzle. And when that ball comes out, it comes out like a knuckleball. You don't know where that thing is going. You just point it in the general direction of the enemy. And if a number of folks are standing up side by side you and they are all shooting those knuckleballs at the same time and everything's whizzing around, you'll aim at this guy and you're lucky if you hit him over here. But if they're over there shooting at that guy, then they're going to hit your man. That's the prevailing theory. My wife thinks it's the craziest thing in the world that people stand in a straight line and shoot like that. And if it wasn't for the primitiveness of the weapons, that would have been the stupidest idea you could possibly do. But this is how these weapons on the battlefield worked. And the musket was the most effective gun on the battlefield because you could load it in 20 seconds and you could put a bayonet on it. And that was the point of standing in a line and shooting a volley, because you follow that up with a bayonet charge. The most feared weapon on the battlefield during the Revolution was a spear. It was spears. Brown Bess muskets were spears that could shoot once. Now, you may stand around and load it 3 or 4. At the Battle of Utah Springs, they shot 17 times. But that's how muskets worked on the battlefield with the bayonet. And that was so important. And we know that an alternative fire lock system was the rifles, the homemade backcountry rifles with a much smaller ball, maybe 30 caliber, than the musket ball. But the barrel of that rifle would be grooved. It would be rifled, and it would cause that ball to spin when it came out of the muzzle. And that spinning action let it go far and true to 200 yards easy, and there are reports of 300-yard woundings from rifle fire. So, oh, that's great. We shoot 200 yards, but it takes a minute to load that thing. So, you know, you can shoot your rifle, and by then, there's a man 200 yards away from you, and he's got a bayonet, and he's running at you. By the time you get that rifle loaded again, he's going to be on you. So, you know, what good is that? Another weapon that was used on the battlefield, and this is with cavalry, is the broadsword. It's called the broadsword, even though it's only 1.25 inches wide. Cavalry tactics, cavalry techniques, swords and swords only, except that horse is a weapon as well for the cavalry. As you charged on, this is what happened at Waxhaw's. Buford had all his men lined up in the line. Tarleton is charging on with his steeds at full force. And Buford told his men to wait till they're 10 yards away before you fired. So Buford's men fired 10 yards away into a charging horse. And they probably killed about 20 horses. There were a total of 270 men, I believe. And I don't think all of them were mounted. But 4 of Tarleton's men were killed during that, about 20 horses. And those dead horses, those live horses, those men, everything now just bowled through Buford's line. Just bowled them over. It didn't matter if the horse was dead or not. That thing was a weapon coming at you. And this is what led to, you know, such a slaughter at the Waxhaws. That line was totally broken up. And you have Tarleton's legionnaires just swinging those swords left and right. So the sword was a very effective weapon. William Washington, America's best cavalryman, Light Horse Harry Lee was our best legionnaire. I'd make a distinction there, but I have the highest regard for both of them. But William Washington discouraged his men from carrying pistols, because what good is a pistol on a moving horse? You got to load it, you got to do, and all that would do would slow you down. Even though there were a few cases, a few incidents of the Revolution. And then there was artillery as well. And artillery was limited, particularly in the backcountry, because it was hard to get it around, to move it around. The most effective artillery piece was a 3-pounder, because it could easily be moved. It could be broken apart and hauled in a wagon. It was called a grasshopper, because every time it fired, it jumped back, 3 or 4 feet. You'd have to aim it and that sort of thing. So all of these weapons had limitations. The musket, the rifle, cavalry sword, and the artillery. The most effective way to use these primitive weapons on the battlefield was to have a combination of them. You got your riflemen as skirmishers out front. They slow down the enemy. As the troops progress, and this is cowpens, as the troops progress, the skirmishers, break ranks and get behind with the infantry that's with muskets or rifles. And, that solid line shoots volleys and really, slows down the approaching enemy as they come. Having a combination and using these different combinations of weaponry is crucial to victory in so many cases. So I wanted to take a little break right now, see if anybody has any questions. Yes, Ray.
I'm assuming it's just cannonballs. I don't think they had
No, they had grape shot.
a great shot. They had great shots.
Yes, and so they used grape shot on the battlefield quite a bit. One thing about artillery, the forts that were in the backcountry, most of them were palisaded forts. The introduction of artillery into the backcountry of South Carolina was the end of palisaded forts because a 3-pounder could batter down a palisaded wall. It could cause damage on several things.
During the Revolutionary War, they didn't have actual bombs shooting out of the cannon.
They had howitzers. They did have howitzers, and they had exploding shells. They were limited. But here in Lawrence County at Hammond's Old Store, the archaeologists found shell fragments at Hammond's Old Store. Now, there are no accounts whatsoever that there were cannons there. But we know that at 96, there were hand grenades. And so now we know that at Hammond's Old Store, there were hand grenades. Filled with black powder, thick cannonballs filled with black powder, and they'd have a fuse on the end. You light it, and it's just like in the cartoons. You throw it, and that's how that exploded. But that was here in Lawrence County. Yes, Frank.
Considering the scarcity of black powder, especially patriots, cannons would take a pound of powder or more to fire, and that would be 500, 600, 800 shots from a musket. So
Yeah,
the
you had to be judicious in its use.
You had to have the supply.
The threat of a cannon was quite enough to cause numerous surrenders. And even William Washington at Rugeley's Fort, that fort was palisaded. It was packed with 300 loyalists. It was a strong fort. It was Mr. Rugeley's barn that was a huge log cabin structure surrounded by a palisade. And so William Washington, he came with his 80 men, and he looks at that strong fort, and he says, fellas, go cut down a 6-inch pine log. And so they cut a pine log and cut it off about like this, painted it black, mounted it on wheels, and rolled it right up to the front of Fort Rugeley and said, surrender or we're going to blow you to smithereens. And Rugeley surrendered. So that was a wonderful thing he did.
When you mentioned firearms and cavalry, when cavalry's used for patrol or foraging or pickets, an early warning system for the encamped army, they would carry pistols because those gunshots would alert the camp that there were marauders about.
They would use them as warning signals.
As warnings, but they would not use them during a battle.
No, they wouldn't. Okay, excuse me, yeah.
Okay, I'm just wondering, if you came down the wagon road from Pennsylvania and you set up your corn, your flax, and had your family to raise, what motivated these people that were so far from Charleston and you weren't paying a lot of taxes and weren't worried about tea and all that? What motivated them to fight in this war?
That's my next sentence. So, and I appreciate you asking that. So, that's just a little bit about the battlefield tactics. But I think that this microphone is weird beyond belief. Hello, testing. Can you hear me now? All right. Seems like it went out for a minute there. One factor that really set the 96th district apart from the rest of South Carolina in reasons for the Revolutionary War is the fact that we were right next to Cherokee territory. As a matter of fact, the district was established. British authorities were happy as here as this is going in and out, isn't it? Anyway, this is one reason that townships were established throughout the backcountry of South Carolina, and Boonesboro Township dab right on top of the Cherokee Path. So as Cherokee through that path, they would go through that settlement as well. The backcountry settlers were considered as buffers for the coastal elite in Charleston who didn't want to be bothered by Indian attacks. And these attacks were part of a 150-year period of retribution, retaliation, recriminations, one right after the other. When did it start? It started when Lucas Vasquez de Ayllon sailed into Waccamaw Harbor, Waccamaw Bay, Winyah Bay, in 1524. And he invited 60 Winyah Native Americans onto his ships, and he promptly pulled up anchor and sailed into the Caribbean and sold them slavery. So that was first contact. That was the Native Americans' introduction to European culture. And so there was 150 years that there were all these conflicts with these different cultures who could not understand how each of the other thought. It was a clash of cultures. You know, in Cherokee society, which had been ruled by Cherokee tribal law for generations, 300 years, and established regularity amongst the Cherokees. The 7 clans, clan law, you belong to the clan of your mother. If there was a transgression that occurred within your mother's clan, say the Wolf clan, it was up to the Wolf clan to deal with that. But if somebody from the Blue clan stole a horse from the Wolf clan, that meant that the Wolf clan had total right to acquire a horse from the Blue clan. Doesn't matter who it is. You've got that clan wronged you by stealing a horse. You have total okay to take a horse from them. Clan versus clan. That's the way it worked. So say that a European settler in Virginia stole a horse. Then the owner of that horse, that member of his clan, can take retribution against the clan of the thief. So who is the clan of the thief? The European man. Who's his clan? It's all one clan. So that means that that wronged individual can go steal a horse from any member of the European clan. So that doesn't make sense, does it? You know, you're not getting it from the fellow who stole the horse. You're getting it from a stranger. Now, that stranger, he's pretty darn upset. And he thinks that the Cherokees or whoever are just a bunch of thieves and all that. And, you know, you can't reason with them. There's only one way to deal with them. I can show you Did this thing go out? There we go. Anyway, so there are numerous examples of what makes total sense to the Native Americans, to the Cherokees, makes absolutely no sense to the European settlers at all. And there were friction after friction. And it is my contention that in the backcountry, in the 96th district, because this area had direct contact with the Cherokees, with these different frictions, that the most important thing to these backcountry settlers was not the royal government in Charleston, who had very little to do with them. But what it was about the effects with how do you deal with this, clash of cultures. Now, the British colonial government, they thought that they could quell Cherokee unrest and Native American unrest if they established the proclamation line of 1763, which ended the French and Indian War, which established the Continental Divide as the point beyond which European settlement would not go. Didn't really apply in South Carolina, but those settlers in Virginia, well, all of a sudden, that Continental Line, I'm not supposed to go across there, or North Carolina, or Pennsylvania. I'm not supposed to go across there. That's virgin land right there, and it's being wasted. We need to prosper by going into this territory. So the British policy was to placate the Cherokees with that promise not to have further expansion. It didn't work. There was the first Cherokee War of 1761 that was major annihilation of the Cherokee Nation. 16 towns in South Carolina and Pickens and Coney County were destroyed. Now, those towns were built back. But in the backcountry of South Carolina, you have this problem with the Cherokees, but you also have other problems and conflicts because you were getting all kinds of road agents and vagabonds and you name it, escaped slaves coming through the territory, causing unrest, lack of security. There was a huge problem with security in the backcountry because the British colonial government, every now and then, they'd send a patrol into the backcountry. But if you thought your neighbor stole your horse, you were supposed to go take a week to go to Charleston and make that complaint and come back in a week. The horse is dead by now. Maybe they'll send a patrol out to deal with that thief, or maybe not. So a movement arose in the backcountry called the Regulators Movement. And the Regulators Movement was to establish law and order in the backcountry of South Carolina because we didn't have it. And in 1769, that's when the 96th district was created, the Judicial Act of 1769. Camden district was established, Charles, Orangeburg, and the 96th district. So that was the Regulators' War, which, again, was a movement for security. Along the coast, the coastal elites, the Rice Kings, their main problem, and they were extremely wealthy. These are plantations with 400 slaves on there at a time. Charleston was the richest city in America. It was the fourth largest, but it was the richest. And the issue with the coastal elite was free trade, because they were growing their rice England controlled, they had a monopoly. They had finished goods in England. They'd trade them in Africa for slaves. They'd bring slaves over to the United States, America, and America would send raw products, corn and indigo and rice back to England so it could be processed. So that's the trade that England had going, and they had it hitting on all cylinders. But they controlled the prices. And the coastal elites, they wanted to sell to France and Holland and Spain and all the rest, who were enemies with England. So that's where a big conflict arose. Plus the issue of paying for the French and Indian War with the taxes, that was a big deal. And then, of course, the taxes with no representation. But what determined into the back country if you were going to be a patriot or a loyalist is a third of the back country, they were going to be loyalists no matter what. They were king's men. And a third of them were going to be rebels no matter what. And then there's a third in the middle that was kind of neutral, and they sided with whoever they thought was going to win. Did you in the backcountry think that security, the number one issue, was going to be achieved through the British colonial government, who was failing in the backcountry? I think security is going to be achieved through the patriot approach, which was extirpation of the Cherokees. That annihilation, genocide, that was the patriot approach. And the British approach had failed. If you thought the way to establish security in the backcountry was to wipe out the Cherokees, then that's what you did. And that's what happened. That is what happened. There is no without security. So I've talked about the conflict between those cultures living side by side. But another thing is I've noticed a clash between modern culture, our culture, and 18th century culture. We don't understand what they were thinking. And they would just have their minds blown if they wound up here in the 21st century. This is a clash of older culture, two different cultures, not being able to understand each other. And what I will never understand is how men fighting for freedom and liberty think that the idea of owning slaves is okay. How do you justify that? Because I'm in the 20s. I don't know if I ever will. I mean, it's obviously a mindset of racial superiority. You know, the slaves had no more rights than a cow did. They were branded. Their families were torn apart on a whim. So, and I know everybody here knows how bad slavery is. I just can't understand how these giants of freedom, and they were, had any thoughts that it was okay to be a slave owner. Testing. It's hard to judge 18th century by today's standards. And that just kind of makes no sense to me at all. Another thing that I have just recently come to really realize is the role of religion and how testing, 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 testing. Boy, I tell you, I talk about religion and look what happens. I'm sorry, God. No kidding. So, there were religious aspects. And the religions that were in South Carolina during this time was the Anglican religion, was the Church of England. And it had major control over occurrences in South Carolina. The other religions were Presbyterian, Baptist, Huguenots, and Lutherans, and Quakers. So, I scratch my head. I mean, how can religion be a factor? Everybody believes in God. We all believe in God. Every commandments, we all believe in the 10 Commandments. What's there to fight over? Well, what dawned on me not too long ago was that these other religions, besides the Anglican, these other religions were Calvinist religions, and John Calvin preached that the way to heaven, each individual has his own personal relationship with God. And the way to heaven is to get right with God. The Anglicans, however, believe that the way to the way to heaven is through the king. The king is God's representative here on earth, similar to the Pope, similar in that regard. But if you went against the precepts of the king, you were going against God. But now here you got these Presbyterians come along saying, hey, king and all. So early on, and this is 100 years before the Revolution, I mean, this is the 1600s, these worshiping of Presbyterianism is a break from the status quo of supporting the king. I mean, the Anglicans were teaching, oppose the king, you were going to hell. So that started a break, a separation right there, which I think continued all the way through. This was the first chink in the king's armor, if you ask me, was the establishment of Calvinist religions. So that was a threat. We talk about why did we start the American Revolution, and yes, we wanted freedom. We love freedom. Freedom is a wonderful concept. But absolute freedom, unchecked freedom, that's anarchy. But that ends those. So I was talking to a friend of mine about this and said, freedom, that can be chaos. And he says, well, okay, we were fighting for liberty. Liberty is freedom with responsibilities. And that sounds nice. If you're responsible, you have freedom. That's a nice responsibilities. Who decides what responsibilities are? What is the line between is it responsible? Can you roll through a stop sign at 5 miles an hour? Is that responsible? 10 miles an hour, is that responsible? Where are those responsibilities? How are those responsibilities established? You know, we're fighting for democracy. Well, form of democracy is a pirate ship. Mob rule is democracy. So there have to be constraints and constraints on democracy. But, and this is what we were fighting for. Who decides what those responsibilities are? Is it some king in England who's never set foot in America, cannot give us security in the backcountry? Who decides our fate? And that was the issue. It's self-determination. We decide. Now, do we have pure democracy? No. We democratically elect our representatives, and they make the decisions, and that process has lasted for 235 years. Our Constitution is the oldest Constitution in the world, and it is copied by at least half the rest of the world. So we determined that the best way to govern is not through an autocratic, authoritarian king, but determining the will of the people, our people, we determine through our democratically elected representatives with separation of powers. Separation of powers is a beautiful thing. It keeps kings from developing. So those are different things I wanted to talk about tonight. And those are things that have struck me over the years. Yes?
I'll take you back to religion.
Yes.
Where did the Baptists fit in all this?
I think they're the ones making the alcohol, weren't they?
I just remember years ago reading a Walter Edgar book. I don't know which one it was. And he was talking about the Presbyterian hated the Baptists worse than they did the Anglicans. And
well, there's a possibility of that. And there's also an author who was talking about the backcountry. He said that 5% of the backcountry was Presbyterian, and 5% was Baptist, and 90% was unchurched. So you have to wonder. But the Baptists were not really strong during this period. They were coming on. Here in Lawrence County, because the Little River District, Lawrence County supported the British so much in the French and Indian War, 1763, that the British colonial government gave 5 acres to the Baptists and 5 acres to the Presbyterians. And these acreages now are Hurricane Baptist Church and Duncan Creek Presbyterian Church. But at the time, they could not call themselves that. You could not use the word church unless it was an Anglican church. You had to call yourself a meeting house. So it was the Baptist meeting house and the Presbyterian meeting house is what those were. Yes? I'm sorry. Well, I'm sorry. Ernie's next. Sorry, he's got the microphone.
I got the mic. I was just curious. I've been to a lot of these lectures you had, and I've loved every one of them. And we talk about militias and people and that kind of thing. Is there any record anywhere of what numbers were on which side? I mean, were there more patriots and loyalists, or is there accounting of that anywhere?
Patriots versus
the numbers. I mean, the numbers of fighters they had. Is there any record of that anywhere?
You know, it was basically 50-50. turned over, there was it was just chaos, absolute chaos. The world turned upside down.
And in the backcountry, I know we talked about the Cunninghams in Orange County with, wealthy landowners. Was there an economic division between the loyalists and the patriots? I mean, with the wealthier people?
I've looked at that, and I don't necessarily think so. And the reason I say that is because there were 8 justices of the peace in the Little River District at the beginning of the Revolution by the colonial government. And Patrick Cunningham and Robert Cunningham were justices of the peace who became loyalists. But Charles Moore, who was the wealthiest man in the backcountry, Walnut Grove Plantation, he was a justice of the peace, and he was one of the leading patriots in the country. So it was divided. Thomas Fletchall was a justice of the peace, and he was a leading loyalist. But I'm not so sure that wealth was a factor or not. I mean, I still think it was kind of equal.
It is true that a lot of people in this part of the country were technically unchurched at that time, but I think it's somewhat misleading because churches had high standards, and they didn't accept anybody and everybody who came to the door and said, "I want to be a member." You had to prove that you subscribed to the doctrines and that you lived a worthy life and so on. So there were a lot of people who wanted to be members of churches, but the churches said, "No, not yet." So it's kind of misleading to say that.
Can you tell he's a preacher?
I am. Presbyterian. And we'll take anybody nowadays.
Hold on. I'm going to. So, well, I did, we talk about unchurched or not. And one specific role that the Anglican Church had in colonial America is you were not legally married unless you were married in the Anglican Church. Any Anglican churches around here, those parishes that were around the coast that had these wonderful brick church buildings built, there were none of those here in the backcountry. There were no Anglican churches here, but the backcountry taxes were paid to be built. But there was an Anglican preacher who made his rounds throughout the backcountry, preaching to the backcountry. And he was a proselytizer of the Anglican religion. And he was marrying couples legally. This was the only way they could be legally married. So he rode through the backcountry, and he wrote down every day how many miles he traveled. And he traveled 6,000 miles through the backcountry. Leading Anglican preacher, the missionary, if you will. And Charles Woodmason is his name, Charles Woodmason. He hated these people back here worse than anything you can imagine. When he's right now, rode 40 miles, but ran across the most scurrilous Presbyterians you could ever imagine. He was no fella to engender charisma whatsoever. But he said with his marriages that there was a fee involved here as well. But with the marriages he performed, out of every 100 couples that he wed, only 6 of them would not be pregnant. So that's what was going on with partly with the Anglicans, and those mothers, expectant mothers, were Presbyterians, but they had to get that legal piece of paper. Yes.
I think you're looking at the church angle through the wrong end of the telescope. It's not that they didn't want to be churched. It's that there was a shortage of ministers.
Well,
many of them met
that.
in homes.
Yeah.
Many of them had, many of the few ministers that were here were on a circuit, and you might see the minister once every 2 or 3 months. And you would meet in a home or at a meeting, a campground or a field. you'd gather because the minister came by.
I
So
know-
it's don't think of these people as not devout, religious, or devoted to their particular sect. It's
Well,
that they didn't have
when I said
physical
90%
building and a
unchurched,
pastor.
that was a joke. 90% unchurched. But anyway, here's an important factor to remember. Now, up here in churches, there were entire congregations that went into the Patriot Militia Army. John Simpson at Fishing Creek Presbyterian Church is perhaps the most famous example. He had 75 members of his congregation, and every single one of them went into Sumter's camp. Christian Huck, who was a Philadelphia lawyer who came down south with Bannister Tarleton, and I think he may have been a Queen's Ranger, not a British Legion, but anyway, he was an enforcer. He was a bad guy, and he hated Presbyterians, and he hated John Simpson. And he took his group, his corps, to Fishing Creek Baptist Church on a Sunday morning because he's wanting to capture the whole congregation. But they had left and gone to Sumter's camp. On the way, 16-year-old Matthew Strong was walking, they say with his Bible in his hand, walking to church. He was killed. And when Christian Huck got to Fishing Creek Church, nobody was there. They burned it to the ground. And Duncan Creek Presbyterian Church, 35 members of that congregation joined the Patriot forces. So the churches were here. And the people did go to them. But, you know, the ministers, I'm sure, were few and far between. Anybody else?
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Alan Barksdale. I'm from Lawrence, but I haven't lived here in a very long time. Some of you may know my parents, Dick and Linda. I was christened in the Episcopal Church right here. I graduated from Presbyterian, and when I was in junior high school, I went to a Baptist revival, so I think I got all my bases
That covered.
Yeah. So a long time ago, I lived in Yorktown, Virginia, and when I toured the battleground there, it was apparently obvious that the French played a tremendous role in the victory of the siege of Yorktown. Can you talk a little bit about any direct French or foreign military involvement in the revolution in this area? Was there any, and if so?
Well, it would have been Savannah would have been the closest. Savannah was the closest, and Savannah was a disaster. I can't believe the French continued to support us after Savannah, but it was a terrible, disorganized. The French had 600 African Americans from, I think it was Guadalupe, and you know, that armed African Americans here in America, that was, you know, anathema to most of the folks. De Grasse was the admiral. He did have the British bottled up in Savannah for a while, but he was worried about it being hurricane season, so he left. And so now there was no control of the seaways like there was at Yorktown later on. But the revolution was huge for us, absolutely huge. And they did after the Battle of Saratoga. And they provided armaments, powder. They provided gunpowder to the backcountry. The French had the best gunpowder. They were the chemists, and their gunpowder was gray. And it smoked a whole heck of a lot less than the black powder did. The British provided 6,000 Charleville muskets to the Patriot forces, and they were stored in Charleston. Well, when Charleston fell, the British got all those 6,000 muskets, and now they doled them out to their forces, and that's why British forces were using French muskets during the Revolution.
French supplied over 100,000
I bet. Yes.
How did 96th district get its name?
The question is, how did 96th district get its name? Sequina was going to warn her lover of a Cherokee attack, and she rode 96 miles and named all these rivers, 3 and 20 Creek, 6 Mile Creek, on her route. Never happened. Hold on a minute. 96 is first shown in history in 1730 on George Hunter's map, and he was to survey the Cherokee Path of Kiowee. And, you know, he named the 2 and 3 and 20 Creek and all this. You see all those notations there. And at the spot where 96 is, he wrote the numerals 9-6. And what we think that he did was he measured the distance from that point to Kiowee, the Cherokee capital. And by the gait of his horse, he figured it was 96 miles. And that's how 96, that's one of the stories how 96 got its name. I've measured that distance myself. 96 is 73 miles from Kiowee. It's not 96. So they changed the name of 96 to 73 sometime. Who knows? Well, I appreciate y'all's time and y'all's interest and y'all's questions. So if you have any other questions, you can talk to me here a little bit later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Durant. We appreciate it.